Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran English jazz pianist Mike Bell. He talked about his new 2023 CD called Jazz on the Rails. This is his second album following his 2017 release called Just for the Record. All the material on the new CD are original, composed and played by Mike himself. He takes a lot of his inspiration from the golden era of jazz with greats like Cannonball Adderley, John Coltrane, Benny Golson, and very much so in particular Mr. Oscar Peterson. Early on, his career went the direction of pop music and country rock, but he circled back around to his love of jazz. He's got a great story. Enjoy. Mike, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out. And before we get into your life and music, I want to touch on COVID. And the last 3 years was something else for all the musicians. How did you survive it, and how has it changed the way that you approach things now?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, COVID, it's interesting for me because just before COVID, I'd recorded an album with a lady. I call her a young lady because she's younger than me. But I'd recorded an album with Andrea, and we'd got to the point of just about to master it when COVID struck. So that kind of put an end to that. I no longer actually go out and gig. I reached the point in my career where I thought I'd done enough of that, and so I simply work in my own studio, which incidentally I've had for 30 years. I'm not a professional engineer, but I know how to work my own studio, as a lot of musicians, have discovered that they can do. And so as far as COVID was concerned, I was pretty used to spending time on my own in my studio anyway, and it didn't really change my way of life at all, except that there was nobody coming into my studio. I should say it's a fairly small studio. I don't have, great drum kits and so forth all over the place. And so I just got on with stuff as usual. And I'd recorded several albums on my own previously. A couple of them were ambient things that I'd done in the past. And in 2017, I did what was mainly a jazz album. And I thought, well, I'll just repeat it. And so I just did another jazz album pretty much during COVID and a bit beyond. Because I could do it on my own. I could just play piano and et cetera, and just get on with it and do it without having to sort of go out and do anything. But as for gigs, I haven't really toured since 2016.
So talk to me a little bit about how this journey in jazz began for you.
I guess that Dominic's given you some blurb, but and on which I say I'm a fairly unusual case because I earned my living not as a jazz player, but as mainly as a country rock player. I played with people like Albert Lee and Dennis the Courier and quite a number of others. I did some stuff with Sonny Curtis of the Crickets and all sorts. Anyway, but that was my professional career. That's what I got paid to do. But of course, I started listening to jazz when I was 10, 11, 12, something like that. And I was listening to Benny Goodman, and some friends of my parents had Benny Goodman albums. So I was, listening to Teddy Wilson play the piano. My dad played the piano, so I was fascinated. I wanted to play as well as he did, and I want, it was just, that was so important for me. And so the piano became very important. So when I was listening to Benny Goodman, I was really listening to Teddy Wilson and, and so on. But of course, what happened as I got a bit older, I kind of moved into, we had a very musical school. I was at a boarding school, and we had a very musical school, and people had a lot of records, and they were, there were Blue Notes records circulating and so forth, and we had tape recorders and recorded them and gave them back and so forth, and so I was listening to Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers and all that stuff, and of course Miles Davis and Coltrane and Milestones and then the Carnegie Miles Davis things, which were just wonderful. But of course, all the while, there was Oscar Peterson lurking in the background, and I couldn't resist him. I mean, he just swung like anything, didn't he? And with Ed Thigpen and Ray Brown, and it was just a wonderful time in jazz to me during the 60s. And it was a bit of a jump up. It was a bit of a leap forward in the sense that I'd been used to listening to much simpler stuff, really. No less technical, but certainly a simpler approach to jazz, listening to Fats Waller, for example, and Benny Goodman and so forth. It was a simpler form of jazz. So it was a bit of a challenge, really, to start listening to Miles and Cannonball Adderley and so forth. So I was still quite young, but I felt it was worth making the effort. It was sort of cool to make the effort because a lot of my contemporaries were making the effort, and I thought, well, I don't want to be left behind because I'm supposed to be musically inclined, and I'd learned to play classical piano from the age of about 5, so I got that background, and I just wanted to stop doing that and just play jazz, and that's what it was. So when we had a jazz band at school, and actually the piano player in the band was so blooming good. He went off to the Royal College of Music in London, that I ended up having to take up saxophone to get into the band, in order to participate. But after he left, I got in as a piano player, and when I left school, I did a lot of jazz gigs, but I discovered that people were going out earning money, real decent money playing music, and so I bought myself a Fender Rhodes after going through the problem of buying a Vox Continental organ, which I didn't care for at all. I was a piano player, not an organist, and so I sold that and got the Fender Rhodes when it came in around 69, 70, and there was no stopping me. I loved the sound of the Fender Rhodes, and jazz was starting to be influenced by it. Herbie Hancock was playing, Fender Rhodes, and everybody else, Stevie Wonder, of course, in the pop world, and I was hooked, and I was also hooked on the notion that if these other guys that I know that aren't terribly good and so forth, I could make a living out of this, So I started putting myself around a bit, and I started to get function gigs, and that was good background, really useful, because for 4 years I had a resident job in a restaurant come nightclub, and we were playing 6 nights a week, and as a trio, and so I learned bass pedals so that we could just function with a guitar as well, and it was very good training. A lot of it was junky stuff, but you really had to be on your toes, and 4 years playing 6 nights a week was a terrific sort of I consider myself very fortunate for that. So really, the jazz kind of went a little bit into the back. Never went into the background. I was constantly listening to it, but I was playing less of it. And I got, I met more musicians who were earning a living by this, and sort of started to do some sessions for people, and got hooked into this, these sessions for this country rock band, and I kind of found myself, very strangely, in this kind of genre, and pretty much stayed in it for most of my working life. But it's not unusual. You've got players like Bill Payne, who played with the band Little Feat, that I'm sure was a jazz player as well as a great country rock player. So I listened to folks like him, and actually, even when I was playing with Albert Lee, who's country rock, amazing legend of a guitarist, I even brought the jazz inflections into that band, which people kind of seem to, many people seem to like. They felt that it kind of complemented Albert's playing, and it actually worked pretty well. And I was with Albert for 13 years, so we must have been doing something right. But I guess that's it in a bit of a nutshell. I hope I haven't talked for too long. Is that okay?
I think you hit a lot of points that I was going to follow up on, but I'm curious, in this journey as a musician, what do you like the best about being a professional musician?
when I say I'm a professional musician, I mean I'm working mainly on my own now. Of course, I am. I mean, there's a funny little story there. You know, there was a lady over the road to us who doesn't know anything about music. Bless her. Why should she? And she introduced me to her son and said, "Mike used to be a musician." It's kind of not one of those things that you ever stop doing, isn't it? Whether you're professional or not. It's not like I used to be a teacher or a banker or something. Anyway, that's by the by. I mean, I like the lifestyle. I mean, that has to be said. I really enjoyed the lifestyle. It was great being on the road and, you know, all that stuff. And of course, but essentially, I liked playing. I mean, I couldn't get enough of it. It was what I'd always wanted to do. I just wanted to play, and I played with some pretty fantastic musicians, and you know, I consider myself pretty lucky for being able to do that. So it was a combination of, you know, playing the piano, which was a lifetime's ambition, if you like, and the lifestyle. I think that probably goes for most of us, and of course, as you get, as in any sort of profession, I suppose, as you get noticed, it becomes even better in a way, because you have a little bit of a reputation. I mean, not like a superstar reputation, but you have some sort of reputation, and therefore you thrive a little bit on that as well. If you stop and think about it, you know, that's. I mean, I suppose most of this I've thought about since I've stopped touring and so forth. But yeah, I figure that's pretty much it, Joe, as far as, you know, the actual business of being a professional musician.
So let's get to the essence of you. And everyone out there has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you're driving the bus, you're in control. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh, I think these days, now that I'm getting a bit older and I'm not out there doing it in the same way, you know, I think I have a pretty good perspective on myself. I kind of know very well my limitations as a player. I think all decent musicians do. You know, I was dogged for years, thinking, well, I'll never be able to play like Oscar Peterson. So what's the point? You know, so I think I think a lot of artists, many artists, you know, have a kind of a low self-esteem factor in which they are always kind of aware of what they, or perhaps more aware of what they can't do than what they can do, and so they overlook their assets and constantly thinking, oh, how does he do that? Why can't I do that? Or why haven't I investigated this? Or other thing, what else should I be doing? But today, it's a strange thing to say, but today, my evaluation of myself is a bit different. I'm no longer dogged by the Oscar Peterson ghost, because I kind of understand that there was no point in trying to compete with Oscar Peterson anyway, any more than there's any point in trying to compete with Keith Jarrett. I think that nevertheless, you can still have something to say as a player. You can still add to a band. You can still write compositions that communicate with other people. I mean, that's our job, isn't it, as musicians, to communicate with people. And if you touch by what you write and what you play, if you touch other people's hearts, if you like, or if you touch other people and communicate emotionally in some way, then it doesn't matter if you're not an Oscar Peterson or a Keith Jarrett. You have to be of a standard, of course, to be able to play your instrument and to sufficiently to be able to communicate. So you know, that's no justification for not being able to play, but you don't have to be the best exponent in the world. So these days, I actually feel that I like what I do. I wouldn't say I'm my favourite player, but I'm one of my favourite players, which is a big thing for me to say, because I spent much of my career, you know, always looking at the things that I couldn't do rather than, you know, the things that I could do. So no, these days I do like very much what I do, and yeah, and I'm okay with that. now, whereas I think for many years, and I know it's a fact with many musicians, that I speak to, when we talk about where we stand in the scheme of things, we don't place ourselves very highly. We don't think of ourselves as great rock stars or great, jazz piano players or whatever, But we did okay, and we have something to say, and we made a contribution somewhere. So that's how I see myself.
That's a great answer.
Does that answer?
Yeah. And I like the way you put it. That's really, really great and grounded and wise. But and I want to get you've covered so much in what I really wanted to talk to you about to get a good background on you. But I really want to make sure that you let everybody know where is the best place to pick up Jazz on the Rails or any of your other work and support your career.
Well, thanks for that opportunity to announce it. But all I can say, nobody buys CDs anymore, do they? They really don't. And so that's a bit of a problem for musicians. But so I've got it up on Spotify. So you can find me on Spotify if you put in Mike Bell and Jazz on the Rails. That I know will find it. I do have a link, and I think Dominic, who put us in touch, he certainly has a link. But the other place is Bandcamp, because my co-producer put us up on Bandcamp. So Spotify and Bandcamp, I know for sure. I'm not sure whether it's on iTunes or not, to be honest, but because I've left that sort of technical side to my co-producer, who happens to be the mastering engineer, so he's much more technical than I am. But yeah, it's Spotify and Bandcamp.
Wonderful, Mike. It's been wonderful to get to know you. Thank you for opening up.
Thank you very much, Joe. Nice to talk to you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in England, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Mike for his time, energy, and cool. If you want to hear more interviews, you can find archived Neon Jazz interviews at Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to us at YouTube. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.